Okay, we're ready to start.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Nisa Shepard-Decker. I'm a social worker with the Dr. Utumi Center in Botwood, Newfoundland, Labrador, and a member of the Professional Issues Committee, soon to be known as the Ethics Committee, with the Newfoundland Labrador Association of Social Workers. I have the honor of being the moderator for today's education event titled Navigating Ethical Issues in Social Work Practice. This is certainly a very timely and important topic. This webinar is a collaboration with the Newfoundland Labrador Association of Social Workers and the Canadian Association of Social Workers, and is an initiative of the NLASW Professional Issues Committee. It is exciting to note that we have 686 social workers from across Canada tuning in today. The webinar presentation will be approximately 40 minutes, followed by a 20-minute question and answer period that I will moderate. All the housekeeping details you need, like how to access a recording, where to download the slides, and how to get your certificate of attendance are all included in the housekeeping widget that has popped up when you first logged on. I now want to introduce our speakers. Their full bios are available on the registration page for this event, but I want to briefly introduce them. Annette Johns is the Associate Director of Policy and Practice with the Newfoundland Labrador Association of Social Workers. Charlene Evans is a social worker with the Department of Children, Seniors, and Social Development and a chair of the NLASW Professional Issues Committee. Simone Pelly is a private practitioner and also a member of the NLASW Professional Issues Committee. So without further ado, I will now pass things over to our presenters to begin the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Charlene starting off, and we are so pleased to be online with you today. And it's exciting that we have social workers attending our presentation from coast to coast. It is always so wonderful when we can come together as colleagues to engage in dialogue and reflection on issues that are so important to us as social workers. Ethical decision-making in social work practice is certainly one of those areas where discussion is so important. While we have information we would like to share with you today, we want to begin this presentation by noting how we as social workers make sound ethical decisions every day in our practices. There is so much knowledge and expertise across our country, and our goal is to provide you with some additional tools that you might find beneficial in your practice. And I'm trying to navigate the slides as well. Our agenda today, first of all, we're going to take a look at our trends in ethical consultations. Then we're going to move into our framework and tools that support some of our ethical decision making. Moving in then to our ethics and social networking, E-Professionalism, and practice research. Ethics itself lies at the heart of our social work profession. And regardless of one's area of practice, social workers grapple with ethical dilemmas and questions in practice on a daily basis. We resolve these all the time. Some are, they're fairly straightforward, while others are quite complex and intense, requiring tremendous energy and resources. Within the space of this hour, we want to discuss ethical decision-making in social work practice. We want to highlight some trends in practice and review the ethical decision-making resource tool that was actually developed by the NLASW Professional Ethics Committee in 2015. Many of you from Newfoundland and Labrador may be quite familiar with this tool, and we hope that you find it beneficial in your practice. As part of the presentation today, we will take a case study example, and we will apply the ethical decision-making framework outlined in this document. We will also highlight E-Professionalism and considerations for social workers. So today is really an ethics booster for us all. Change slide. We're going to start looking at a few trends, and we're going to go into boundaries, privacy and confidentiality, and informed consent. There is no doubt that issues pertaining to boundaries are some of the most challenging in our field. Some are overt and explicit, while others tend to be more subtle. Many of the requests that we receive for ethical consultation have focused on boundaries. Boundary issues created because of possible dual relationships, or conflicts of interest that arise as professional boundaries are challenged. Personal self-disclosure can also create boundary challenges and impact the social work relationship when not addressed through an ethical framework. Dilemmas pertaining to boundaries can occur in face-to-face interactions and within the online environment of social networking and electronic communication. We refer to online boundaries as virtual boundaries. Dealing with boundary issues in practice can be quite difficult, and yet sometimes we attempt to deal with them on our own, or we can normalize the conflict so we don't have to expose our vulnerabilities or struggle not knowing the correct response. We want to normalize the discussion today, as we all face and are challenged by these kinds of ethical dilemmas in practice. Peer support is so important, and we want to promote this message today. It is by talking through our struggles that we come out on the other side of more informed and confident in our decision making. While the focus of our presentation today will be primarily on boundaries, issues pertaining to privacy and confidentiality and informed consent often arise as part of our ethical discussions with members and will be addressed through the presentation. Using practice tools, such as the tool that we will be discussing later in the presentation, can be helpful in assisting social workers as they navigate the gray in social work practice, because we all know it's not black and white. At the end, we will also highlight another tool developed by the NLASW Professional Issues Committee on Informed Consent and Documentation that was actually produced this year. Informed consent and documentation are two of the best tools that you can use for addressing and preventing many ethical dilemmas in practice. There's a few questions that's highlighted on this particular slide that we may face in practice. Is it ever appropriate for social workers to maintain relationships with clients after the professional relationship has terminated? Should social workers ever disclose personal information to clients? Should social workers ever personally hire former clients? What do I do if a client contacts me on my personal social media account? As we think about our ethical dilemmas involving boundaries in practice, I am sure each of you online today can think of at least some examples that have challenged you in your practice. A client presents you with a gift during a session. Your client is upset and you wonder if a hug may be appropriate. A client asks you about your family. From rural Newfoundland, I have this happen to me all the time. A client or a former client finds you on Facebook and sends you a friend request. You are planning your child's birthday party and one of your clients is a classmate of your daughter. At the heart of these scenarios is boundaries. In social work practice, there will always be the human element in our relationships with clients, and there are often no clear black and white answers when it comes to working through these issues in practice. If we consider the question of should social workers ever disclose personal information to clients, for example, many of us online here today have had different experiences and we have different perspectives on this particular issue. We have to consider the context of the practice. We need to note any cultural considerations. We need to examine our rationale for self-disclosing or not disclosing. We need to consider how much self-disclosure may be appropriate, what are the risks or the benefits, and importantly, in whose interest is the disclosure being made. As social workers, we have an ethical responsibility to maintain the best interests of our clients as a priority. And it is this responsibility that we need to continuously reflect on. Boundaries are an important component of every professional relationship and allows for that safe connection for clients in professional relationships. As noted earlier, boundaries in professional practice is an area that we tend to get request for unethical consultations. For example, a former client wanting a more friendly relationship, having a relative present as a client, the hiring of clients, and of course, increasingly in the past few years, electronic interactions with clients. We also receive consultations pertaining to conflicts of interest, which arise within the parameters of dual relationships and as professional boundaries are challenged. Our next slide, we're going to just briefly look at countertransference. And countertransference is feeling towards a client the same feeling the social worker has had towards someone else. As we explore boundaries, we need to consider countertransference and the impact this may have on our decision making. Countertransference is feeling towards a client the same feeling the social worker has towards someone else, as I previously stated. These feelings can be either positive or negative. The client could possess characteristics that can really irritate. They can remind you of someone that you really like and admire. It can remind us of a previous partner, a mom, a dad. There could be something about the physical appearance. The client could be the same age as your child. There's some people that we could really connect with. And also we can never forget the human factor. An important question for reflection is, would I do for every client what I am doing for this client? If not, why not? There may be times in our lives when we are more vulnerable in our decision making, so self-awareness is so important. We're looking at our continuum from encounters to violations when it comes to boundaries. Questions of boundaries arise when social workers relate to clients, and that could be families, colleagues, in more than one relationship, whether that's personal, professional, social, or business, which in turn may create actual, potential, or perceived conflicts of interest. It is helpful to look at boundaries and issues that may arise along a continuum, and that is from our encounters to our violations. Examples of encounters might include running into a client at the supermarket and having them ask for advice, or receiving a Facebook friend request from a client, attending the same church as your client. There's a number of examples we can give. Decisions made at the encounters at the beginning of our continuum are so critical and require thoughtful consideration. We need to look at how to respond in a way that is respectful to the client, but also in keeping with social work ethics. Boundary crossings, or boundary bending, you can call it, are not in and of themselves unethical. Examples of boundary crossings might include telling a client a little bit about your personal life, so a little bit of self-disclosure, or accepting a small gift from a client, especially this month, it's December. Boundary crossings move up the continuum when they are harmful or have potential harmful consequences for the client, even if the harm is not intentional. For example, self-disclosure that confuses a client or changes the nature of how the client views the relationship can be harmful. This also includes online self-disclosure as well. A boundary violation occurs when a social worker engages in a dual relationship with a client that is harmful to the client. Sexual relationships with a client or an online intimate relationship with a client will be harmful self-disclosure, violations of trust, placing of social work's needs above client needs. In the online world, an example could be that a client sees a negative online post that a social worker has written online about their employer, and the client questions the service that they are receiving. Or a client sees an intoxicated picture of you and your friends on Facebook, and they are seeing you for addictions counseling. Another example of a boundary violation would be the posting of client information, and this could be identifying or not, on a personal social networking platform. Personal social networking platforms, they are public forums and are developing an online intimate or romantic relationship in this genre is also harmful. In examining boundaries in social work practice, it is so important that we be alert to actual or perceived conflicts of interest when it comes to our relationship with our clients. How clients perceive an interaction becomes their reality, even if it was. An ethical dilemma. What we are defining it as for our presentation by Linzer 1999 is a choice between two actions based on conflicting values. Both may be morally correct or professionally grounded. Both may be right or good. This is the dilemma for the practitioner. None of us will ever have all the answers when it comes to ethical decision making. It changes over time, and we change over time. Even putting together two reasonable social workers, we will have debates. It is recognized that personal values, culture, religious beliefs and practices, factors such as age, ability, gender, these can all affect our ethical choices. Therefore, we need to tease out the personal versus the professional values, and that becomes a part of the entire process of effective ethical decision making. For example, as individuals, we may not agree with medical assistance in dying or abortion, but as social workers, we agree with the principle of self-determination and the right of clients to make their own decisions. We refer to another social worker if we cannot uphold the professional values for personal reasons. In ethical decision making, we need to acknowledge what it is making us feeling uncomfortable and seek guidance from the Code of Ethics and our peers. I'm going to pass on the presentation now to Simone to begin our discussion on ethical decision making tools. Simone?
All right, so I'm going to give everybody some background on the tool now. The NLASW Professional Issues Committee produced an ethical decision resource guide in September 2015. Now, this guide, which is grounded in the Code of Ethics and professional literature, is a resource social workers can use to navigate the ethical complexities in practice and make ethical decisions. It captures best practice and presents clear my throat there. It captures best practice and presents an ethics-informed process for decision making. It's succinct and user-friendly, and that makes it the perfect desk reference, along with the CSW Code of Ethics and guidelines for ethical practice and standards of practice. In this guide, you're going to find a reference to the Code of Ethics, explore the components of ethical decision making, examine risk tolerance and how this impacts on practice, consider the importance of critical reflection and professional judgment, and find an ethical decision-making model that can be used in practice. Now, we'll take a deeper look into some of these particular areas. Since this guide is grounded in the Code of Ethics, it fosters an ethical decision-making process that is in keeping with the ethics and values of our profession. When attempting to resolve ethical dilemmas in practice, we recommend pulling out the Code of Ethics and reflecting on the values and principles. As noted by one of the participants in the 2008 study of the use of Code of Ethics by social workers in Newfoundland and Labrador, someone contributed, sometimes we'll use the code and be better informed, and other times we will still find ourselves in a dilemma. Yet, it's the code that identifies and affirms our fundamental values. Now let's use the code, and we'll look to it for guidance around professional boundaries as an example. So here on the slide, we've listed out the 6 values in the code. So referring to value number 1, if we really respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person, we will always keep the client's need in the forefront and ensure that clients are able to make decisions based on informed consent. And we'll limit our involvement in the personal affairs of clients to the matters related to the services being provided. Now going on to value number 2, in the pursuit of social justice. This value is concerned with fairness and equal treatment. When boundaries are being bended or challenged, ask yourself this question. Is there a reason why I might be treating this client differently than others? And if you answer that question yes, then you really got to reflect on why. Value number 3, service to humanity. This speaks to the importance of social workers placing client interests above their own interests and using their power, because social workers do have power, in a way that meets the need of the client. When personal and professional values conflict, it's the professional value that has to take priority. Value number 4, integrity. It's the responsibility of social workers to establish the tenor of their professional relationship with clients and to maintain professional boundaries through the course of the social worker-client relationship, and even after that relationship has been terminated. Number 5, confidentiality. Respecting the client's right to privacy and understanding the difference between confidentiality and privacy. When we access information without the professional reason to do so, we're violating a client's right to privacy. And then value number 6, competence in professional practice. We uphold the client's right to be offered the highest quality of service because boundaries are put in place, ultimately, for the safety of our clients. And it's through a reflection on the code of ethics that we consider the test of reasonableness in our decision-making. Based on ethical guidance, what would a reasonable social worker do in this situation? And that actually really leads into and speaks to the importance of the need for our professional self-regulation. Okay. As we make ethical decisions, it's helpful to examine all the relevant issues and factors that might be impacting our decision-making in any given situation. It's through this reflection and by using our professional judgment and expertise that we resolve ethical dilemmas in practice. The Code of Ethics, as reflected in the previous slide, is one component of ethical practice. Social work practice is connected to an ethical framework. And I particularly like how this model on the screen here, developed by Beverly Ansell, who also authored the 2005 CASW Code of Ethics, how she shows the interconnectedness between all the different components of practice. And in her model, there's an emphasis on human rights, and then moving clockwise around the diagram, context, the social worker, and the client. So the top bubble there, the blue one on the top, addressing human rights. Some of the ethical principles relating to human rights include the respect for the dignity and autonomy of persons, non-discrimination, informed consent, privacy, and confidentiality. And then we move to the right, context. What are the relevant laws and regulations that guide our work? Does our workplace have a policy that's applicable to the ethical issue we are trying to resolve? And then if you move to the left and consider the client, clients bring their own priorities and resources. Being culturally competent means that we have to consider the historical context of clients and take into consideration the client's culture, their age, their gender, life experience, and their own life stories. And last but not least, us, the social workers. This is where our own ethical orientation comes into play, where we can access the Code of Ethics, standard of practice, and our ability to be able to reflect on and evaluate and develop our own risk tolerance. When resolving ethical dilemmas in practice, it's important to be reflected on your own comfort level with risk for oneself and for our clients, and the impact that this has on our decision making. Are there times when our risk tolerance might be too high or too low? As professionals, we can make arguments for and against risk, and our tolerance for risk can fall along a continuum. This is why critical self-reflection and awareness is so important. Very often, our comfort level with risk is impacted by the anticipated consequences, whether those consequences are real or perceived. Now, our risk tolerance isn't static, and it can certainly change over time. Factors that might influence our tolerance for risk in practice might include our personal values and beliefs, our past experience, both personal and professional, the stage in our career, our area of practice, access to supervision and consultation, organizational policies and mandate, legislation, workplace culture, our theoretical orientation, our client's own risk tolerance, and the community culture. When considering risk tolerance, there are a number of dilemmas we can encounter as social workers. One example is when the social worker's professional risk tolerance differs from an employer's risk tolerance, or when the social worker's professional risk tolerance contradicts with a professional value, or when a social worker's risk tolerance differs from the risk tolerance of the client or the client's support system. Risk tolerance is a part of a broader ethical framework. Therefore, we must explore risk within the context of client self-determination, informed consent, capacity, and decision-making. Best interests of the client should consider human rights and legal and legislative response. A review of the CASW Code of Ethics and Guidelines for Ethical Practice and ethical decision-making models are a great starting point. We can also encourage dialogue and discuss our risk tolerance with our colleagues, supervisors, and peers. Open dialogue combined with self-awareness will allow us to enhance our critical thinking and appreciate the shades of gray while navigating the ethical complexities in social work practice. In developing this resource tool, the committee reviewed many of the ethical decision-making models that are in the literature and developed this framework on a best practice approach. Now I'm going to walk us through each of the steps of the ethical decision-making model. The first step, clearly articulate the dilemma. In articulating the dilemma, we have to identify what values are in conflict. It's by highlighting this conflict that we can distinguish first, is it an ethical dilemma or is it a practice dilemma? Number two, consider your immediate reaction. What's your gut instinct for resolving this dilemma? Are there red flags that you're concerned about? Number three, consult the Code of Ethics. When you review the Code of Ethics and Guidelines for Ethical Practice, does this provide any guidance? We recommend keeping these documents on your desk or within easy reach for quick review. The association has had incidents where members might call for an ethical consultation, and when we walk through the code, they often say that had they reviewed it first, the phone consult may not have been necessary. Some might say, and we heard this from our research here in Newfoundland and Labrador, that the values outlined in the Code of Ethics are intrinsic to us as social workers. Now, that might be true on some level, but really it's through reviewing the code that we ground our decision-making and our professional ethics. And our thinking may change based on context of practice, or our risk tolerance. What policies or standards might be applicable? Step number 4. Does the workplace have policies that need to be considered? In addition to the Code of Ethics, does your regulatory body have standards or guidelines? In Newfoundland and Labrador, we've got standards on our website that members or members of the Greater Canadian Association could certainly refer to, pertaining to documentation, supervision, technology use, and cultural competence. And moving down to the next step, determine if there are legal aspects to the dilemma. Would a legal consult be helpful? For members with professional liability insurance through the CASW, you can avail of a 30-minute legal consult. Consider whether the issue was addressed as part of the informed consent process. Why or why not? You might need to revisit the informed consent, and you might want to discuss and to revisit and see what's been agreed to. Now, I just noticed I skipped the one above there, access for cultural considerations, that we also take into consideration after having looked through the lens of the Code of Ethics and the agency's policies and the legislation to consider the context and the culture in which we work. Once you've worked down through each of these steps, consider what your options are, but then identify the risks and benefits for each option. Again, consider this within the context of your own risk tolerance and practice area. Then, consult, consult, consult. Consult with a colleague, consult with your supervisor, consult with a manager, or consult with your regulatory body. Social workers identify peer consultation as their top means for resolving ethical dilemmas in practice. Who really better to consult with than a trusted peer who can help you think through the ethical considerations? Documentation of our ethical decision making is also important. How did you arrive at your decision? Can you articulate each of the steps that you took? And how did you communicate that decision to your client? It's important to note that if you don't feel comfortable documenting your decision or your actions, this might be a flag that something is not right, and you need some additional time to think through the scenario and review these steps again. Once you have made your decision, continue to monitor and evaluate it to see if it's working for you and your client. Open dialogue with your client is really important. When consulting the Code of Ethics, there might be times when the code will not specifically address the dilemma, or when the code provides conflicting guidance. In these instances, social workers might find it helpful to use the Ethical Principles Screen developed by Dolgoff, Lewinberg, and Harrington in 2005. The Ethical Principles Screen involves the ranking of ethical principles. Now, for example, in this model, the protection of life on the top of the hierarchy supersedes privacy and confidentiality, which is further down in the hierarchy. As with any ethical decision-making tool, we must use our professional judgment when using these tools and consult with a colleague or supervisor as needed. Ethical behavior comes from a social worker's individual commitment to engage in ethical practice. Both the spirit and the letter of this Code of Ethics will guide social workers as they act in good faith and with a genuine desire to make sound judgments. The NLASW Ethical Decision-Making Guide document highlights the importance of critical reflection and the use of professional judgment as being integral to the ethical decision-making framework, as is importantly addressed in the preamble for the Code of Ethics. Now, here are some reflective questions that you might find helpful in critically reflecting on ethical dilemmas in practice. Am I placing my client first, or am I motivated by my own needs? Are professional boundaries being challenged? Have I set clear boundaries with my client? Is the situation or the dilemma creating a blend between my personal and professional life? Would I consider it to be reasonable for another social worker to make a similar decision given the facts and circumstances? Can I explain the rationale for my decision and link it to my professional code of ethics? Are there other influences that have little to do with my professional role that might be influencing my decision making? It's important to always be engaging and reflective in practice, identifying potential red flags and dealing with issues in a preventative way when possible. Having conversations with clients up front can help mitigate potential dilemmas down the road. For example, letting a client know about your social media policy at the onset of the social worker relationship can help avoid any awkward conversations later on that that you might have with a client if they send you a request to join their social networking site. The would I document question is also a great pause for thought strategy. The last 8 slides provided an overview of what you will find in the Ethical Decision Making Resource Guide developed by the NLASW Professional Issues Committee. We encourage you to go to the website and download this tool and use it in your practice. Annette will now take a few minutes to explore social media as it relates to the ethical decision making in social work practice.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So as we consider boundaries in social work practice, it is important that we explore this within the context of technology. Technology use continues to grow and expand. What is now considered vintage networking has been replaced with mediums such as Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. It is inevitable that this growth in technology would start to impact on us personally and professionally. We are all social beings, and now we are connected within a web of online technology that is accessible at our fingertips. As social media use continues to grow, social workers must examine the use of this technology within the realm of professional practice and ethics, particularly as it relates to personal and professional boundaries, self-disclosure, dual and multiple relationships, privacy and confidentiality, and informed consent. Social workers have always had to balance their personal and professional lives and to develop their own strategies for addressing boundary issues in practice. In rural areas in particular, this is the norm. Given the fact that the global world is now in easy reach to us, our presence online is very much like working and living in a rural community. I'm sure that this resonates with many of you attending today who live and work in rural and remote communities, and we can certainly learn a lot from hearing your experiences and the strategies that you've developed that we can extend to the online environment. Examples of ethical dilemmas or issues created by social media certainly include how to handle friend requests from clients or former clients, deciding whether to seek out client information through social media, whether to post information related to our work or information about clients on a blog or Facebook page, having a client access your online profile and gathering information about you that you would not normally disclose to a client, finding out that a client is a friend of a friend on Facebook, or having professional colleagues who post online content that you believe to be offensive or inappropriate. So I just want to take a few minutes to walk us through some of these in more detail. So self-disclosure and boundaries. As social workers, it's important that we consider what we may be revealing about ourselves through social media and who has access to this information. It could be clients, potential clients, our colleagues, and our employers. Does your social networking profile portray a different persona than you would like to be viewed professionally? And what does your online presence say about you? How might this reflect positively or negatively on your profession? This is certainly an area where we need to reflect on as individuals and professionals. As professionals, we do have expectations of privacy for ourselves and believe in the right to express ourselves as individuals. However, social media is a public forum and nothing on the Internet is ever private or secure. Whenever we post online, we leave electronic footprints, so this is something that we need to be thinking about and discussing. When we look at the issues of privacy and confidentiality, we also need to be attuned to client privacy and confidentiality. How might privacy and confidentiality be impacted, for example, if we accept a client friend request or post information about our work on a social networking site? As social workers, we have an ethical responsibility to protect client confidentiality, and even if we post information online that does not identify a specific client, this may not be enough to protect client confidentiality. Clients can be identified by case details, geographical information, and organizational specifics, even if the person's name is not used. And we also need to consider this from the vantage point of the client, who may read and identify with online posts that may be written by social workers. Conflicts of interest and dual relationships. If we accept a client's friend request on a personal social networking platform, is this now a dual relationship? I would argue that it is, as the relationship extends the professional relationship. So some helpful reflective questions may include, what is the intent of the friend request? Would client confidentiality be impacted? How comfortable are you in having clients know details about your life that you wouldn't normally disclose to them? How might an online relationship with a client impact on the therapeutic relationship? Would the client now expect more accessibility to you outside of work hours? How would you handle a distress message posted by a client late at night? And how might an online relationship with a client be viewed by your colleagues and peers? Working through these questions and critically reflecting on the issues will help you in making a decision that is ultimately in the best interest of clients. If you feel apprehensive about accepting the friend request and documenting this in the client file, this may be an indicator that boundaries are being crossed, and to have a dialogue with the client about your reason for not being able to accept the request. And having this open and honest dialogue can actually enhance the client's trust in the professional relationship. As you can appreciate, we're not talking about new or clinical professional issues. Only the medium has changed to create these virtual or online boundaries. Therefore, we need to be thinking about how this interfaces with our professional practice and using the tools like we have presented here today. So I'm now going to walk you through a case example and how we can actually apply the ethical decision-making model that was developed by our committee. So the case example is Karen is a registered social worker who's concerned about her current client who has missed his last 3 scheduled appointments. Karen has not been able to reach the client by phone. Knowing that this client has a Facebook profile, Karen questions whether she should search the client's Facebook page to check in on the client. So one of the first things we would do with the model as we've presented is to try and articulate what the conflict is. And this will be, would Karen's concern for the client supersede the client's right to privacy? So in thinking through the dilemma, we would look at the Code of Ethics and the guiding principles that may be relevant to this case. Certainly in thinking through this case, value 1, respect for the inherent dignity and worth of persons, and value 4, integrity in professional practice would be relevant. Value 1 in the Code of Ethics speaks to the importance of informed consent in practice. Did Karen review her social media policy, if she has one, at the beginning of the therapeutic relationship, and was the client agreeable to this? If Karen does not have a social media policy, does her employer or organization have one? If there is no policy, is the use of social media searches on clients appropriate? If the issue of Facebook check-ins has not been discussed previously, the social worker must use her own professional judgment on whether or not the client is at risk for serious, foreseeable, and imminent harm at this point in time. The NLASW does have standards pertaining to technology use in social work practice, and the Association of Social Work Boards in the U.S. have model regulatory standards. And I'm just going to read you 2 sections from that particular document that says that social workers develop and disclose to clients policies on the use of Internet-based search engines to gather information about clients. And another section from that document is social workers obtain client consent when using electronic search engines to gather information about the client, with the exception of emergency circumstances when the search may provide information to help protect the client or other parties who may be at risk. So the case study noted that the social worker was only concerned about the client. So the social worker would need to consider her own risk tolerance and consider the risk for the client, knowing what the clinical relationship is. So it would be important to consult those extra documents as the social worker looks at her decision-making process. Another area for consideration is legal considerations. And while looking up client information on a public social media platform is not illegal per se, the ethical considerations are paramount. Informed consent is an ethical and legal responsibility the social workers have, so this will be important for the social worker in moving forward. Consultation, as we've noted previously, would also be important. Karen would also need to consider the impact that searching her client's Facebook page would have on a therapeutic relationship. Would this be a boundary crossing, a boundary violation? What does Karen intend to do with any information learned about her client through this check-in? And could this impact her ability to remain unbiased? Would Karen use Facebook to search information on other clients? And how is she documenting this information? As the professional relationship continues, the social worker would need to have a conversation with the client on how, when, and for what purposes personal information is accessed to ensure client determination. It would also be helpful for the social worker in this case to develop risk management strategies in crisis situations, and all this information could be documented in the file. So based on our discussion and a thorough review of best practices and standards in the professional literature, there are several things that we can do to ensure that our ethical compass is on course. Review the Code of Ethics and other practice documents. And every time I pull out the code in relation to a case consult, my thinking deepens. We need to be vigilant in our efforts to recognize boundary challenges and consider how we can address these in the informed consent. And I'm a firm believer that many of these ethical challenges can be mitigated or even prevented through informed consent. Identifying any potential conflicts of interest and working through those, consulting, developing a plan of action, documentation, and ongoing critical thinking. So in relation to this case, because it was an online case, we wanted to introduce you to the concept of E-Professionalism. And many of you may have already heard this term, but E-Professionalism refers to the development of an online persona that is congruent with the values and ethics of the professional and portrays use of self in a way that is respectful and demonstrates professional integrity. The full reference for this is included in the Practice Matters document that was uploaded with the presentation. So we need to be thinking about how we portray ourselves online and where this information is going to. And this next slide is just a comic that depicts how we are judged by our online presence, reminding us to be mindful about what our online presence does say about us. So the more context we have on social media sites, the greater likelihood that our personal and professional boundaries will cross through the web of online social networking platforms. Also, information about us as individuals is more accessible than ever before, even those who aren't our real friends, which you can kind of see from this comic strip that's up. And professional blogging is another activity we need to be mindful of in terms of this intersection between our personal and professional values. We recently looked at an example in our committee meeting that looked at blogging, and where a social worker who had shared her own personal views about same-sex marriages and how government should not be recognizing same-sex couples. So we had a very enlightening conversation on that, and that particular article will be coming out in our provincial social work newsletter in January of 2018. So you might want to keep your eye out for that as we delve into that issue a little bit further. So in terms of risk management strategies, in addition to looking at our ethical decision-making model that we presented earlier, in terms of our online presence, there are certainly some risk management strategies that you can follow. One being familiar with the operational policies of social networking platforms that you use. And it's important to recognize that even if privacy settings are set high, it doesn't guarantee privacy. We know that messages can be tagged, saved to computers, and forwarded beyond the intended recipient. And some social networking sites are set up to automatically change privacy settings to allow for the sharing of information. Keep personal and professional internet accounts separate and recognize when boundaries are being crossed. So if we think back to the case example with Karen and her consideration of using social media to search a client, whose computer was that being carried out from? Was it her personal computer? And does that make a difference? Remember that the internet is permanent and everything you post or write may have a lasting impact. Periodically check to see what's available about you online. Google yourself. I don't know how many people have done that, but it's interesting to see what is available about us online. And think about how your online comments will be perceived and interpreted. Pause before posting or sending. Few of us actually sit behind a computer to access social media, so we're using our cell phones and tablets to access our accounts. And does this accessibility make us more disinhibited on what we might post or send through social media? That's another great thing to think about. And how many of us have sent an email and wish we could recall that message? So pause before posting is always great. And we also need to think about how our online comments affect the profession in general. And we would say to not post anything online that you would not want repeated in a crowded room or to read on the front page of your provincial newspaper. It's always good to have our own policies around social media so that we can share those with clients and to always engage in continued learning. So we need to appreciate the risks and benefits of social media use and continue to use our professional judgment in balancing these in our practices and become competent users of social media. So we do have a number of resources that we wanted to leave with you, in addition to obviously the Code of Ethics and the Guidelines for Ethical Practice. The Ethical Decision Making Resource Tool has been uploaded to the site for you as well. And several members of our publications of our Practice Matters publications is available online as well. So this was something we launched in 2011, and Practice Matters is an educational resource social workers can use as they work through ethical issues in practice. 2 of the documents have been uploaded, like I said, and you can read the full roster of our documents on the NLASW website. And the content for these publications come from our own ethical discussions with colleagues and from many of the ethical consultations we receive. So I do encourage you to check out our website at www.nlasw.ca and see the range of resources that we do have available. We did talk throughout the presentation about the importance of informed consent and documentation, and we do have a recent document that we produced on documentation and informed consent that goes through the elements and what social workers need to be thinking about in terms of content and things to include in informed consent and documentation that you would find very informative as well. And that's been uploaded to this presentation site as well. So on that note, I will hand things back over to Nissa.
Thank you. Thank you to Charlene, Simone, and Annette. And so we've now arrived at our question and answer section. I'll try my best to get all the questions out there, I guess, that have been asked. However, please note that we do have over 600 people on the line, and we may not be able to get all of your questions presented by the participants out to our presenters. But as Annette noted, the NLASW has many resources that participants can refer to on our website at www.nlasw.ca. So our first question is, what are some of the things social workers should consider when clients present them with a gift?
This is Annette. I can take the lead on this one because someone did ask the question, did I correctly hear that the acceptance of small gifts was appropriate? So we wanted to clarify some of that. So while gift giving is recognized as a common way of expressing thanks and appreciation, the practice of accepting a gift from a client, while seemingly straightforward, may not be as simple as we first think. So when we're presented with a gift from a client, we do need to use our own professional judgment in making a decision in the best interests of our clients. And some of the issues that we might need to think about are certainly the context of practice and the relationship we have with our clients. Is a service voluntary, involuntary, for example? What's the appropriateness of a gift? Even something that's very small and doesn't have a lot of monetary value can still be something that's quite significant for the client and need to be looked at in terms of its appropriateness. Meaning of the gift. A poem from a child versus an offer to fix your car for free are certainly on the different continuum of gift giving. What might be the intent or perceived intent of the gift? Was it presented at the beginning, middle, or end stage of the therapeutic relationship? Would there be any cultural considerations that need to be thought about? And does the organization have a policy? So as you can see, these are important areas to explore within the parameters of boundaries. And we would follow our ethical decision-making model that we presented earlier to look at our code of ethics and to consult our policies, consider the cultural piece, consider if we've talked about this in the informed consent, what are the risks and benefits, and being transparent with the client about the dilemma and the impact that it could have on the therapeutic relationship, and then how would you document that? These are always important considerations.
Okay, that's great. Next question is, can you give an example of where a social worker's risk tolerance might be different than an employer's risk tolerance?
Okay, again, this is me and Ed. In 2012, the NLASW produced a document titled Social Work and Decision-Specific Capacity Assessments. And in that particular example, in that particular resource, we gave an example of where a client was a resident of a long-term care home and had been paralyzed and not able to speak, but did use a letterboard for spelling words and pictures and those kinds of things. And based on her physical challenges, she was placed on a pureed diet and wasn't allowed to have any solid foods. So as Christmas approached, as is the time of year now, the client was adamant that she did not want a pureed meal and she was going to have her turkey dinner with all the trimmings. So as you can appreciate, the institution was their risk tolerance was very low and, did not want to honor the request for this woman to have her turkey dinner. The social worker in this particular case, whose risk tolerance was similar to the client's, actually advocated on behalf of the client because the person did have capacity. So this was a person who, while living in a long-term care facility, did have capacity to make decisions. And they actually went through a capacity assessment and went through that. And, of course, the family as well were adamant that the mom not have access to the turkey dinner because they were afraid she would choke. So that's just one example where the risk tolerance of the client and the social worker certainly differ from that of the organization.
Okay. Last question. What would you document related to the ethical decision-making process?
Hi, this is Charlene. I'll take that question. Social work records should contain client information, professional observations, clinical decisions, intervention strategies, and client outcomes. It is also important that the ethical decision-making process, one used to work through an ethical dilemma, be appropriately documented in that client record. You can frame your note by using the ethical decision-making model that we talked about earlier. And you need to clearly articulate the dilemma, speak to the values outlined in the Code of Ethics. You should reference any standards of practice that you reviewed. Explore the informed consent piece. Note any cultural considerations. Document if you have had this discussion with your client and any consultation you have had with your manager or supervisor. In saying that, however, it is not recommended that you document disagreements or problems or issues with a manager or supervisor in the file. Only client care should be included.
Okay, so I'll wrap things up now, I guess. We're running short on time. So I want to thank Annette, Simone, and Charlene for the stellar presentation and for sharing your knowledge and experience with us today. As social workers, Ethical decision-making is a skill that we need to continuously reflect and build on. Having access to tools such as the Ethical Decision-Making Resource Guide produced by the NLASW Professional Issues Committee provides us with a roadmap for navigating these dilemmas in practice. Peer consultations, discussions with our supervisors, managers, and reviewing the Code of Ethics and Standards of Practice are also very great strategies. So appreciate the gray and the uncomfortableness that ethical dilemmas present in our work, and continue this dialogue with our colleagues. Again, the recording of this presentation, slides, and resources will be uploaded to the CASW website and the NLASW website for your reference. And for those who attended 45 minutes or more of this presentation, can receive confirmation of the attendance available by clicking the yellow icon at the bottom right of your window. Thanks again to everyone who participated, took the time from your busy schedules to participate in our webinar today. I hope you found the information very informative and that you take away something helpful that will inform and support your day-to-day practice. And enjoy the rest of your day.